If you don't decide where your life is going, distraction will decide for you. Welcome to the Rebellious Remedy. I'm Jonathan Ennis, founder of Dream Root Wellness. Here we return to Christ as the foundation of true health, body, mind, heart, and spirit, so we can steward our lives in faithful obedience to God's design. If you're ready to walk this out with others, you're invited to join the Dream Root Wellness Network. Join today at community.dreamrootwellness.com. Welcome back. Last week, we talked about the sky of the tree of wellness. We talked about perspective, about rising above the noise long enough to see your life clearly. Because when you're buried in the next task, the next problem, the next message, the next little emergency, it gets hard to tell whether you're actually moving in a meaningful direction or just reacting to whatever happens to be in front of you. This week, we're taking the next step. We're talking about planning. That's part 1 of 3 when it comes to the sky of wellness. Plan, assess, reflect. Now, I know planning doesn't sound all that exciting. It can bring to mind calendars, task lists, productivity apps, and color-coded schedules people spend more time organizing than actually following. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the difference between a life that's being cultivated with intention and a life that's mostly just happening to you. Because vision by itself isn't enough. You can see the bigger picture and still never act on it. You can know what matters and still spend your days on what doesn't. You can want to become healthier, stronger, more disciplined, more faithful, and still live in a way that keeps carrying you somewhere else. That doesn't always happen because a person is insincere. A lot of the time it happens because the desire never becomes direction. That's where planning comes in. Planning is how you take what matters most right now and give it a place in your life. It's how conviction becomes action. It's how you stop letting your days be shaped entirely by pressure, interruption, appetite, and convenience. And let's be honest, plenty of people aren't failing to plan because they're lazy. They've simply gotten used to living reactively. We wake up already behind, check our phone, answer the messages already building up, deal with the problems before we have barely even started, begin our rush through the day, put out fire after fire, then we go to bed tired and rinse and repeat. After a while, that starts to feel normal. Everybody's living this way, we say to ourselves to justify it. But Scripture doesn't call us to be living normally. We're not called to live like the world. We're called to live set apart, to live wisely. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and 16 says, "Pay careful attention then to how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil." Pay careful attention to how you walk. That's the issue. We focus too much on the minutia of life, the things we say matter to us, what we hope to do someday, what we're gonna do if life ever slows down. But how are you actually walking today? What are your days producing right now? Where are your habits taking you? What kind of person is your current way of living shaping you into? Those questions can be uncomfortable, but they're worth asking, because if you don't define your direction, something else will. Distractions, urgency, other people's expectations, your own unexamined habits, the plans of the enemy, all of these things will determine where you go. And it won't happen all at once. It'll happen quietly in small pieces until months have passed and you realize you've been busy the whole time without becoming any different. You weren't made to live that way. You were made to grow. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 26 says, "Make a level path for your feet, and all your ways will be sure." Planning matters because clarity creates momentum. When you don't know what you're aiming at, life starts to feel like survival. Like we talked about before, you wake up, handle what's nearest and most urgent, and hope that somehow all the effort you put in adds up to progress. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. Busyness can be deceptive. A full schedule can make you feel responsible, productive, even important, while the things that actually matter keep getting pushed to the side. A plan helps you correct that. It gives your effort a target. It helps you decide what deserves your time and what doesn't. It gives shape to your energy so you're not just spending it, but you're investing it. That investment matters because effort and progress aren't the same thing. You can be putting in effort constantly and still go nowhere worth going. You can work hard while neglecting your body. You can stay mentally occupied while failing to grow in wisdom. You can keep up with responsibilities while letting your spiritual life grow thin. Planning doesn't make life easy. It makes your effort more deliberate, more focused, and more productive. And if you're serious about stewarding your body, your mind, your heart, and your spirit, if you're serious about stewarding your time and calling, then good intentions alone won't carry you very far. You need direction, and that's what planning accomplishes. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 34, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Today has enough trouble of its own." Some people take that verse to mean that planning itself is a problem, but it isn't. Jesus is warning against anxiety, not the wisdom of planning your path forward. Anxiety tries to seize control of what belongs to God, while planning takes responsibility for what God has actually placed in your hands. That distinction matters. You don't have to ignore your future, but you also don't need a 10-year plan before you can obey today. In other words, you should be stewarding the day in front of you while also moving toward a greater vision or plan for your life. That's the heart of the biblical 24-hour life. What does faithfulness look like today? What can I do today that's clear, useful, and repeatable? What action today would support the kind of person God is calling me to become? What would move me even slightly toward greater strength, discipline, peace, and obedience? That's wise planning. It isn't anxious control, it isn't perfectionism, and isn't trying to map every mile of the road before taking the next step. It's choosing to live today on purpose while being sure to ask, how does this move me deeper into the future? How does it take me further down the road God has laid before me? People often assume failure comes from not trying hard enough. Sometimes that's true, but many people are trying hard. They're exerting effort all day long. They're handling responsibilities, making decisions, responding to needs, juggling multiple balls in the air. The issue isn't effort itself, but sometimes it is misplaced effort. That's where a lot of people find themselves. They aren't lazy. They aren't doing nothing. They're just spread thin, and the things that matter most keep losing to whatever feels most urgent. When you don't know what deserves priority, everything starts demanding equal attention. Every request feels pressing. Every interruption gets access to your energy. Every inconvenience becomes a reason to delay the bigger things you said mattered. Before long, you're no longer living from conviction. You're living from demand. And that will weaken anyone over time. Usually, it happens slowly. You skip the walk because the day got away from you. You put off prayer because you're tired. You eat whatever's easiest because you didn't think ahead. You say you'll get back to the book next week. You ignore the tension in your marriage, your body, your emotions, or your schedule because there's always something else to handle first. Then weeks pass, maybe years pass, and what began as a string of small compromises starts looking a lot like a way of life that's leading you down the wrong path. Planning interrupts that. It gives you a chance to decide ahead of time what you're going to protect. Your health, your focus, your energy, your peace, your obedience. That's why good planning isn't restrictive. Instead, it helps keep you from being ruled by the chaos of this life. Now, there's also something deeply biblical about making a plan, provided it's done with humility. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 3 says, "Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be achieved." That verse isn't a promise that every idea you come up with will unfold exactly the way you imagined. It's a reminder that your work and your plans should be placed under God. You plan, but you do it with open hands. You say, Lord, this life is yours. My body is yours. My mind is yours. My time is yours. Teach me to walk wisely with what you've entrusted to me. That's a very different posture from what we often see around us. The world teaches people to plan for self-optimization, more output, more income, more control, more personal advancement. But biblical planning begins with stewardship. It asks, how do I order my life in a way that reflects obedience to God? Planning isn't about worshiping your schedule. It's about refusing to live carelessly. It's about choosing to live with intention, to live obediently. Planning doesn't have to be complicated to be useful. In fact, if your plan is so elaborate that you can't realistically live it out, it's not a plan at all. It's a fantasy. This week, I don't want you to merely agree with the idea of planning. I want you to do it, not mentally, in writing, because vague thoughts are easy to admire and just as easy to abandon, but writing them out forces clarity. Here's the framework I want you to use. It's 5 parts. First, define the destination. Second, map the milestones. Third, identify your roadblocks. Fourth, build in accountability. And fifth, share your plan. Let's dive deeper into each of these. Number 1, define the destination. Get clear about where you're trying to go. What would a healthier, stronger, freer, more Christ-centered life look like for you over the next 6 to 12 months? Be specific. What needs to change? What needs to grow? What needs to be strengthened or cut away? What have you tolerated for too long? What have you excused that wisdom is now confronting? These questions matter because a lot of people say they want wellness, but never define it beyond this vague feeling. Write out what your growth needs to look like in each of the 4 branches of wellness: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. For example, what does wellness look like for you physically? More energy? Better sleep? Greater strength? A healthier relationship with food? You may write, I'll build strength and energy through whole foods, daily movements, and consistent sleep. What about mentally? Less distraction? Better focus? More reading? Greater discernment? For the mental branch, you might write, I'll guard my attention, limit distraction, and pursue wisdom through daily learning. What about the emotional branch? More self-control? Less reactivity? Healthier boundaries? A clear understanding of what's happening in your own heart? You may write something like, I'll pay attention to what's happening in my heart and respond to stress with truth and self-control. And what about the spiritual branch? More consistency in scripture? A deeper prayer life? Stronger fellowship? Quicker obedience? For the spiritual branch, you may write something like this: I'll seek God daily through scripture and prayer, and I'll work to root my choices more deeply in His truth. Those are only examples. Write out your own. Don't worry about making them sound impressive. Make them honest. If you don't define what you're building toward, it'll be hard to build anything at all. So define the destination. Tell the truth about where you are and tell the truth about where you need to grow. Number 2, map the milestones. Once you've defined the destination, break it down. Ask yourself, what does that future require from my life today? Not someday, today. Because the life you want isn't built through bursts of motivation. It's built through repeated actions that are simple enough to return to day after day. Turn those goals into daily practices by keeping the biblical 24-hour life in view. Your actions should be clear enough to complete today and realistic enough to repeat tomorrow. That's where plans stop being inspirational and start becoming useful. For example, for the physical branch, you might plan to eat 130 grams of protein, walk 8,000 steps, and get 8 hours of sleep. For the mental branch, you might plan to recite 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 3 times every day. Put the phone away after 5 p.m. and then read 10 pages of a worthwhile book. For the emotional branch, you might plan to complete one emotional journaling entry before bed every night. For the spiritual branch, you might plan to read one chapter of scripture daily and write out one prayer in a prayer journal. You don't live your whole 6-month vision in one day. You live one day in a way that serves the vision. So choose actions that fit inside a normal day and point in the right direction. Actions that strengthen your body, actions that sharpen your mind, actions that govern your emotions, actions that deepen your life with God. That's how growth actually happens. Not all at once, but one faithful day at a time. Number 3, identify your roadblocks. Don't plan for an imaginary life where you're always well-rested, undistracted, untempted, and unbothered. Plan for the life you actually have. Scripture doesn't call this pessimism. It calls it wisdom. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3 says, "The prudent see danger and take cover, but the simple keep going and suffer the consequences." So ask the honest question, what is most likely to throw me off today? Is it lack of time, distraction, fatigue, low motivation, poor boundaries, overcommitment, lack of convenience, emotional avoidance? Name it. Bring it into the light. Then decide in advance how you're going to respond when it shows up. Because temptation, resistance, distraction, and weakness are not surprises to the faithful steward. They're realities to prepare for. I don't have time might become, I'll put my wellness practices on the calendar before the week begins. I lose motivation might become, I'll keep the commitment small enough to complete even when I don't feel like it. I get distracted might become, I'll remove the obvious temptations before they become a problem. I overcommit might become, I'll stop saying yes automatically and start asking whether this supports the life I'm called to steward. That's wisdom. That's stewardship. You're not simply hoping for success. You're watching carefully how you walk. Number 4, build in accountability. Choose someone to check in with weekly. A friend, a coach, a member of the Dream Root Wellness Network. Use a tracker, a journal, the community feed, whatever helps you stay honest about whether you're doing what you said you'd do. Repeated follow-through matters because it rebuilds trust between your intentions and your behavior. You don't have to do this alone, but you do have to show up. Number 5, share your plan. Post your wellness plan for others to see. Not to be performative, not to look impressive, but to be committed. Once you say something clearly and profess it publicly, it becomes harder to hide from that. And your willingness to get specific may help someone else do the same. That's one of the blessings of community. Your obedience can strengthen more than just yourself. Here's the larger warning. If you don't make a plan, the world will gladly provide one. Every scroll is competing for your attention. Every ad is trying to shape your desire. Every notification wants a piece of your focus. Every craving is ready to argue against discipline. Every urgent demand would love to become your master for the day. If you never slow down long enough to think, pray, and choose your direction, your life will be arranged by default, by algorithms, by stress, by convenience, by other people's priorities, by whatever distracts you the most in the moment. That's why you can feel constantly occupied while still sensing that something important is slipping through your fingers. Your days are full, but they aren't well directed. So when you step back and make a plan, you're doing more than organizing tasks. You're reclaiming ground. You're taking responsibility for your attention, for your habits, and for your stewardship. Let me say this in closing. Success doesn't happen by accident. It grows where there's intention, stewardship, and faithful action. Health isn't a handout, it's a harvest. And harvest requires more than wanting something good to grow. You have to plant, you have to tend, you have to return to the work day after day when it would be easier to just walk away. So make the plan, not the perfect plan, the honest one, the faithful one, the one that gives your time some direction and your habits a clear purpose. Take the next step today. Don't merely hope for wellness, cultivate it. Next week, we're going deeper into assessing. Remember, there's 3 parts of the sky: plan, assess, reflect. Now, making a plan is important, but it isn't the whole process. You also need to know whether your plan is working. You need to be able to see what's producing fruit, what's draining you, where you're making progress, and where something needs to change. Assessment keeps your plan honest. It helps you stop living by assumption. So next session, we'll talk about how to assess your life, your habits, and your direction in a way that's useful, grounded, and true.